Hi guys, this is John here. In this lecture, we will look at an example of how a human has to predict or estimate the output. In the previous lecture, we looked at the difference between classification, or as we called as identification, and the difference between classification and estimation. We looked at different examples. In this lecture, we will look at estimation or prediction. Now, if you remember, we have two characters in our story, Jimmy and Sarah. Now, in session number 2, Jimmy was participating in a color identification competition. Now, let us look at a scenario where he has to participate in a competition where he has to predict the price of the pizza. Now, the rules of the competition are simple. If Jimmy is given the size of the pizza, he has to predict or estimate the price, or in simple terms, the cost of the pizza. So that's the competition. So let's go ahead and see how Jimmy would go about learning this. And as part of this lecture, we will also see how we judge whether Jimmy has learned properly or not. Okay guys, the rules of the competition are simple. Jimmy has to identify the price of the pizza correctly. Now for that, if he does it correctly from the word go, Jimmy wins. If Jimmy loses, he has an option of trying to learn again. Now there he has two options. If you remember, our first option is increase our practice problems or our learning set. If you remember from session number 2, is if our learning is not good, we have two options in front of us. Option number 1 is we increase the learning set or we increase our practice problems. Option number 2 is we change the teacher. So let us just go through this journey of Jimmy and see how he goes about learning this. So his learning journey would go through 5 steps. Step number 1, he goes to his teacher for practicing problems. Step number 2, the teacher trains him on 3 different pizza sizes. Step number 3, if you remember, the teacher would now test whether Jimmy has learnt properly or not. Step number 4, Sarah, his friend, will prepare his result table. Now, a quick recollection for you guys. If you remember, in session number 2, we had seen that the result table was called a confusion matrix or a confusion table, and it looked something like this. Now, this was specific to classification or identification. When it comes to estimation, the result table will be a little different. And step number 5, based on his results, Jimmy either decides to increase the problem statements or change the teacher. So now let us go ahead and see the learning journey that Jimmy would go through. In this case, the teacher has information of 5 pizzas that she decides to split such that she trains Jimmy with 3 pizzas and decides to test Jimmy with 2 pizzas. So if you remember, the training was called as the training set and the testing was called as the testing set. And if you remember, the result table is built on the testing set. Okay, I'm just trying to revise your memory so that we are able to understand all the concepts and remember them. So now here, she takes 5 pizzas and she decides to train Jimmy on 3. So what does she do? She shows Jimmy, if it's a 6-inch pizza, the cost is 40 rupees. If it's a 10-inch pizza, then the cost is 140. If it's a 12-inch pizza, then the cost is 180. So she decides to train Jimmy, and Jimmy understands that as my pizza size is increasing from 6 to 12, the cost is also increasing. So Jimmy gets some general sense of how the cost is behaving. So now the teacher, once she has trained Jimmy, she decides to test him, and let's go ahead and look at that. Now in step number 3, the teacher will test Jimmy on whether he can estimate the pizza prices accurately. And what she does is that she gives him two pizza sizes, 8 inches and 11 inches, and asks him to estimate the price. Now, if you remember in the previous slide, the teacher had used these 3 pizza sizes to train Jimmy, and now she is testing him with these 2 pizza sizes. And based on that, Sarah, if you remember, is responsible for filling in the result table for Jimmy. And what she's doing is, she knows the correct answers and she is filling in the answers given by Jimmy here. And based on the difference between the two, she calculates the error. And as we know in English, the word error also means mistake. So we are calculating the amount. I'm taking a grammatical liberty, the amount of mistake that Jimmy has made, and this is the error that is calculated here. So let's go ahead and look at what are the values that Jimmy gives us. So now, when the teacher asks Jimmy for a 11-inch pizza, what is your answer? Jimmy says 160 rupees. And for an 8-inch pizza, what is your answer? And Jimmy says 95 rupees. Whereas Sarah knows that 160 rupees is the right answer for 11 inches and 80 rupees is the right answer for 8 inches. So based on this, she will go ahead and calculate the error. So to understand this again, what we do is we ask Jimmy, what is the value for a 11-inch pizza? And Jimmy's answer is 160 rupees. For an 8-inch pizza, it's 95 rupees. These are Jimmy's answers. We compare those answers with the actual answers, and based on the difference, we calculate an error. I hope this reiteration was clear. Let's continue. So let us go ahead and see how the error is calculated. So the error is the difference between the correct output and the predicted output. Again, predicted also means estimated. Now in our case, Jimmy's answers are the predicted output, and the correct output Sarah already knew, as we saw on the previous table. And what we do is we take the difference between the correct answer and the predicted answer. So we take the correct minus predicted, or predicted minus correct. It's one and the same because we are just calculating the difference. And we take an average of all the errors, and based on the total average error, we are able to judge whether the prediction is good or bad. So let us go ahead and calculate the error for Jimmy. So the error in the first case is 160 and 160, so the error is 0. The difference between 80 and 95 is 15. Now, whether you do 80 minus 95 or 95 minus 80, the difference is still 15. In one case, it will be minus 15. But when it comes to calculating error for us, we do not worry about the sign. We are more concerned about the absolute value, which in this case is 15. So if I look at the average error, it is 15 plus 0, which is adding these two numbers, because there are two cases here. Divide by 2, which is equal to 15 divided by, which is equal to 7.5. So the error here is 7.5, and our objective for Jimmy is that his average error should be as close to 0 as possible. In that case, Jimmy has two options. Option number 1 is to go back to the teacher and ask for more practice problems so she can give him more pizza sizes to practice. And option number 2 is to go to a new teacher. So let's see what happens with Jimmy in the next lecture. In this lecture, we saw that Jimmy had to predict the price of the pizza, and he went through a 5-step learning process where he would first go to the teacher for practicing problems. He would then train on 3 different pizza sizes. He then would go ahead and test himself on 2 pizza sizes. His friend Sarah would help him prepare a result table. And based on the result calculation, he decides whether he needs to increase his data set or change the teacher. Now, what we saw was the teacher trained him on 3 pizza sizes and the price for each of those sizes. Once she taught him, she was then going to test him. And to test Jimmy, she took 2 pizza sizes, 8 inches and 11 inches, where he was supposed to give the answers. Based on Jimmy's answers, Sarah was asked to fill in his result table and calculate the error. Jimmy gave these answers, and based on the difference between the two, an error was calculated. We saw that the error is the difference between the correct answer and the predicted answer. Jimmy's answer was the predicted answer or the estimated answer. And the difference here in one case was 0, in the other case was 15. And we took an average of both the errors, which in this case was 15 plus 0 divided by 2, which was 7.5. Now this error is quite high, means Jimmy could go wrong by 7.5 rupees on a given pizza size, and we need to bring that error as close to 0. So now there are 2 options in front of Jimmy. He has to increase his learning data, which is look at more pizza sizes, or he needs to change the teacher. So we shall look at that in the next lecture. I hope the concept in this lecture was clear. What we need to understand is when it comes to estimation or prediction, we have a concept of error. And for the recollection of your memory, in session 2, when it comes to classification or identification, we have the concept of a confusion matrix. So in estimation, we have error, and in classification, we have confusion matrix. Please remember that. So I hope the concepts were clear in this lecture. In the next lecture, we will look at how we can improve the error. I hope this lecture was clear. I'll see you guys in the next lecture. Thank you.